welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host, Jordox, and this week I'm taking a look at my top 5 buy low and sell high candidates at this late stage of the preseason, as well as some names that caught my attention across all the practice matches that we had in the last week. I actually started a new keeper league last week, which is pretty exciting, and I'm starting a new dynasty league this week with the draft on Thursday. So I'm really excited about the dynasty particularly because we're playing with no free agents and no waiver access, which I've never done before. Every league I've ever played in has had free agents. So it's going to be really a whole different strategy, particularly this draft that we're having this week. It's just so much more important than any draft I've ever done because I've always felt with a draft it's important to get it right, but I'm pretty good at finding guys in the free agency pool throughout the year and grabbing the guys before they pop. But won't be able to do it in this league. So yeah, going to be interesting. I've got pick 7 in a 12-team league, which I don't love because I won't be able to get any of those, those really top-end guys like Dacos and Sheasel. And I'm also nowhere near the turn. So I'm just sort of in no man's land. Anyway, we'll see how we go. Before I get to my buy low, sell high candidates, and for anyone wondering what that actually means, I've picked 10 players all up. 5 players I think that you should target in your leagues and buy them at their low point. And then on the flip of that, 5 guys I reckon you could sell right now, trade out, even though they are at the high point. So I'll get into that a bit later and give my reasoning for all that. Before I do, I'll just have a bit of a run through the practice games we had across the last week, and it's been pretty funny. I mean, we're so starved of any football, and then we have these practice matches and we see things, and there's been some absolute legends out there taking the fantasy stats for us so we can have fantasy scores. But I think so much of it has to be taken with the ultimate grain of salt. And really what you're looking for at this time of year is just the role that the player has and not worry too much about the score. And then even if it's a really big player putting up a crap score and not looking very good, it is just a practice match. It's not even an official practice match. They start this week. So you just got to remember that. But having said that, we did have a whole roster of games play, and it was great to have some footy. And these are the players that sort of caught my attention, little things I've picked up that, won't sort of push me in either direction on them, but I'll have in my mind as I watch the upcoming practice matches this week. So the first one's Connor McDonald for Hawthorn. There was a fair bit of, there's been a lot of hype about him this preseason, moving into a midfield role at Hawthorn, and that was momentarily squashed by Sam Mitchell, the coach, coming out and saying he'll be playing forward. But I did think that was the case. And in this game, the practice game against Geelong, he did play midfield and he looked fantastic. So it wasn't a full-time mid-role, but it was enough to see him become one of the bigger scorers in our forward lines. And as I mentioned about him, I think on last week's episode, I don't think it's going to be to the point where he loses forward status for next year, which is a big plus. In the same game, Ollie Dempsey for Geelong played a lot of the game on the ball on the inside, which certainly caught my attention, but you only have to remember that Bailey Smith, Max Holmes and Paddy Dangerfield weren't playing, and really, unfortunately, Tanner Bruhn was a late withdrawal. Yes, that's right, Geelong pulled a late withdrawal in a practice match. Classic. But yeah, I was really looking forward to seeing Bruhn, and if this halfback role is everything we've sort of heard. So, bit of a shame he didn't play. Dempsey, I think I really rate him. I think he could be one of the best sort of wingman scorers we have for this sort of, in recent years. So I'm big on him anyway. I guess it's nice that he went on the inside for a little bit just to have a bit of a go at it, and we know that maybe they'll use him in that position at times throughout his career. Over at Brisbane, they played Carlton. Kadeem Coleman was the one, and Chris Fagan had sort of flagged early this preseason that Coleman might be used forward because he's been out for the best part of 2 seasons now, and in that time, Brisbane have developed Darcy Wilmot, Jasper Fletcher, Dane Zorko's done a Benjamin Button and is still as good as he's ever been. So it kind of makes sense that they're going to try Coleman forward, particularly with Callum Archie leaving the club. So Coleman at half forward, and I think he was even out of the square at times. He looked really good. He looked fit. He looked healthy. And he played really well. It's just, it's not the plum half-back role that those who have held Coleman all these years were hoping for. But I think, hang on, and I'll actually touch on Coleman a bit later because I think there's a silver lining here. No such silver linings for poor Adam Cerra at Carlton, who's just, there's a handful of players you see them and they can't buy a trick when it comes to their bodies and injury luck. And unfortunately, he's had a big hamstring issue. I think it's like 8 weeks. So we're not going to see him for the first month of the season at least, which is a real blow for Carlton and for Cerra himself. But crisis creates opportunity, and I'm really excited for the opportunity that may now be afforded to Cooper Lord, who's someone I was really up and about with last year with that forward status. He's a mid-only now, but I think with the Cerra injury particularly, we're going to see more of him through the midfield, and it'll be with, Walsh and Cripps and Jagger Smith. It's going to be a very cool midfield. Looking forward to watching it for the Blues. Not so cool for Liam Reedy, which has got me nervous. For anyone who listened to last week's episode, I put up my 5 big calls for 2026, and one of them was that Liam Reedy would end the season as Carlton's number 1 ruck. But it's not been a good start. He was certainly not the preferred choice in this Pracky match, and from all reports, he didn't really make a fist of the opportunities he had. So, yeah, interesting to see what happens with the Pracky match this week and then opening round if he's even there. But I guess I've still got the whole season for my for my call to come true. Just not a great start. For the Bulldogs, another injury for them in Bailey Dale, who's got a knee issue and he might miss the first round or 2 of the year. And, these 2 names I'm about to talk about were already very relevant and guys I was interested in. That's Lockie Jack and Connor Buderick. So Jack has sort of come out of nowhere in the last few weeks as a dude that will likely be playing in their first game for the Doggies. And I think a lot of that's to do with the injury to their new recruit, Carmichael, who was looking to be someone they'd throw straight in there. Now, Buderick, anyone who's listened to this pod will know I've been very big on Buderick from the moment that trade was done late last year from the Suns, and he looked really good in that role, in that distribution role in this game. So I'm pretty excited about where he's at and what it's going to look like. For Sydney, Riley Bice looked really good, and I saw a few people talking about him. He's someone that got a mention in my defender rankings the other week as someone who, if he can get the role and have the role and the job security, he showed last year he can score really well. So a good start for him. I think he's in the best 23 at the moment, and he could play the role with Callum Mills as those half-back guys. I just wonder what it means for Matty Roberts, who was pushed to the wing at times last year and then was out of the side. So I'm still not sure what that makeup will be, but the fact that Bice did really well in this practice game has certainly caught my attention. For Gold Coast, Leo Lombard looked really good pushing up the ground as a high forward. And the reason I mention him is I've sort of thought with Lombard he's a great guy to grab because of the forward status this year. And I thought it was probably likely that he'd have a decent year. Best case scenario, he'd play every game and have a decent year, but he'd lose that forward status next year from being on the wing. But it sounds like he's sort of half forward wing, so good chance he keeps forward status for another year at least, and that just makes him more of an asset than he already was. For the Giants, Kieran Briggs, he had an interesting role to start, and coming off a down year, people aren't sure what to make of Briggs. I'm pretty optimistic he bounces back this year and gets more in line with the scoring we saw before 2025. But in this game, it was an interesting start. He was sort of key forward, and they gave Jake Riccardi a go as the main ruck, which was a bit of a surprise. And I think Briggs kicked 3 goals in the first quarter and finished with 4 or 5. And I don't know. It's a practice game, so you can't take too much out of it. But what it did say to me is, this year there's been a bit of a, if you're a Kieran Briggs owner, there's a bit of nervousness about Nick Madden, the backup, who's got a few games last year and he's really doing well. And I think he's going to be close to knocking down the door, or at least knocking on the door of the number 1 ruck spot, even though he's so young, Madden. But knowing now that Briggs can, it's been 1 game, but seeing that Briggs can play in a key forward role and do a really good job, I think he was against pretty young opposition in the defenders. I think it was Collingwood. But just knowing Briggs has that means they could bring Madden in and play the 2 of them, and it wouldn't be a case of Madden in, Briggs out. So I think in a keeper league, if you've got Briggs and you can grab Madden and do the old handcuff, I think you're safe. But I'm just not as worried about Briggs now that he has some other strings to his bow, potentially. Harry Rouston, he looked fantastic for Giants last year in the games he played, and he got plenty of midfield time. I thought this was a guy who you'd grab and stash. He's one for the future for sure, but with everything that's happened with the Giants and their injury list, I think we're going to see him in the midfield. And it's very exciting because, for those who've already done their redrafts and nabbed him probably super late, you'd be absolutely stoked that he might get the opportunity now, not next year or whenever we sort of forecast it. So Tom Green's out for the year. Finn Callahan's got an issue that he might be all right for the start of the season. And even Brent Daniels, who's someone we all thought could go through the middle as well, when fit, he's injured again. So plenty of opportunity for Rouston, and looking forward to seeing him get a go at it. The entire Melbourne midfield was of interest to me and many others, I'm sure. And it was the main 4 were Jack Steele, Caleb Windsor, Trent Rivers, Harvey Langford. And none of that's a surprise, but it's pretty good to hear if you're an owner of Rivers or Windsor, even Langford, although I don't think it matters. Langford's going to be a gun eventually. But Windsor's an interesting one. I really was surprised to see him given midfield time late last year, and they're sticking with it. So pretty cool. He's got defender status. I think you'd be pretty happy with that if you're an owner. And then Trent Rivers, I'm a long-time Rivers owner and truther, and every year I feel like this is the year he goes into the midfield, and it doesn't really happen that way. But this is the year. I can feel it. So it's exciting. We'll see how that goes. Over to my Crows, who, put in a good effort and beat Port Adelaide, which is always nice, even in a glorified practice match. But the big story, and it had been brewing for weeks, we'd heard whispers, we'd heard Lachlan McAndrew was going to be the preferred ruck over Riley O'Brien. they played the intra-club game, and McAndrew was in the A's and Rob was in the B's, and now this game was played and they didn't even play Rob, and McAndrew was the man, and he looked excellent. He looked really, really good. He sort of offers a lot of the stuff that O'Brien doesn't, and that's not a knock on O'Brien. He's been an excellent sort of, warrior for the club, but his limitations are his limitations, and McAndrew might just be able to squeeze him out of that number one spot much earlier than I anticipated. And I think it helps these rule changes are going to suit McAndrew, who's got that bigger leap, and O'Brien's going to struggle a bit with it. So McAndrew, probably largely unknown to most before the last few weeks. If he's sitting in your waivers and you've done your draft already, and he's just sitting there, go get him, because I think he's going to be the number one ruck, at least to start the season for the Crows. Also for the Crows, young Braden Cook, he's been around a few years. I liked what I'd read and heard about him this pre-season, training really well, training in a half-back role. And I think it was the week before last they had an intra-club game, but he played for the Bs, the B side. And I kind of thought, nah, maybe not. But he played in this game. He looked really good in that role. And I guess you got to look at who wasn't there. Mitch Hinge is out, injured, and Isaac Cumming as well, although he's more of a wingman these days. But yeah, I like Cook, and I think if you were interested in him, this game really did what you needed, and you got a good look at it. He's got forward status as well, so a great little pickup late in drafts. For Port Adelaide, Will Brodie played on the ball as we expected, as I expect him to for the start of the season. The big question on him is, can he play more of a flexible role to allow other mids to come in? Because obviously Ollie Wines is suspended for rounds 1 and 2. We all sort of feel like that's his audition, Will Brodie, and then there's a big decision that they'll make in round 3. And in this game, I don't think he did anything amazing, but he was the in and under mid that we know, and I think he looked pretty good. So yeah, the proof will be in the next few weeks for sure. And then the last name I've got, just to wrap this up, Ryan Marrick for West Coast. He's an interesting player. So he had that role change last year and was very popular in classic game and draft and keepers, and because he had forward status and he went and played off half back, he was taking kick-ins, and then eventually they moved him up to the wing, and that's where he sort of sat. He actually put out some big scores to finish the year, but I mean, I don't know how everyone else felt about him heading into this season, but it was a case of, well, if he's not a half back anymore, I'm just not that interested. But I feel like he is. He's been training there, and in this game he was taking kick-ins, playing that distributor role. And I think the reason is that McCarthy, the mid-season draftee from last year, he came in and played that half-back role, and I think that's what pushed Marrick to the wing late last year. McCarthy looks like he's a midfielder now. He's been training in the middle, and he played on ball in this game. So that means that spot's there for Marrick again. He doesn't have the forward status anymore, of course, but he's a pretty interesting guy if that role is there again. And he's only, I think, 21 years old too, so a perfect guy to latch onto in a keeper league. And that... Oh, no, I do have one more. Sorry. One more player. Luke Ryan for Freo. I saw something written about him that came from a Fremantle coach. I don't know who it was. Just that he's on the fringes of the best 23, and even as it stands, he might not even be in the best 23, which really surprised me. I mean, it's not like he's 35 years old. He's probably not even 30. So that was a surprise, but it got me interested and excited for Judd McVie, who's a guy that I've been talking up all pre-season as someone that can have a real breakout and pick up that distribution role for Freo. It sounds like Brandon Walker is the man who's going to be in, so to speak, for Luke Ryan. And from what I heard, he played that role really well on the weekend. But I think there's going to be a little bit of a share of the footy. It's not going to just be one or two. I think Geordie Clark, McVee, Brandon Walker, even Heath Chapman. You can't forget about him. He was someone that I always thought was going to be pretty good in that role and just hasn't exploded in the fantasy world. So there'll be a few back there. But Luke Ryan, maybe not in the 23. That really caught my attention. Now, before I jump into my sell high, buy low candidates, I did want to just give a quick plug for an event that's coming up that I'm pretty excited about. The coaches panel are having a live event in Collingwood on the 8th of March. It's Sunday the 8th of March, which is the day before the Labor Day public holiday in Melbourne. And if you grab your ticket before the 28th of Feb, it's $30 and first drink is on the house, which is pretty good. So doors open at 5. The live podcast will be on at 5:30. And then at 7 o'clock, when it's all done, we're all going to kick back and enjoy St Kilda Collingwood on the big screen to end opening round. So yeah, if you're around, you live nearby, come on down and check it out. It's going to be a lot of fun. All the coaches panel guys will be there. MJ, Minnie Monk, we've got Dylan Alexander coming, a host of other guests as well, and I'll be there as well. And yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be good fun. So yeah, if you're around, come check it out. Coaches panel, a live event at the Wheat, Wine and Whiskey Gastro Pub and Venue in Collingwood, Sunday, March the 8th. Head over to coachespanel.tv or find the Coaches Panel on X, or I'll tweet something on the Finders Keepers page at FindKeepAFL if you want to get a ticket and come along. In a keeper in a dynasty league, after the draft and the free agency that we have access to, trading is the biggest way to change your squad. And it is hands down my favourite part of the game. It's there's so much to it, and I think I'll spend time on another episode, to be honest, going into the detail of the different types of trades and strategies you can have around that. But there is so much to it, because a real underrated aspect of trading is actually the relationships you build with the other coaches in your league. And it can vary, obviously, if you're in a league with mates who know you pretty well versus playing in a league with people you're not that familiar with. It can be very different, but it's really important to build a good reputation amongst your peers just to increase your chances of getting things done. If you have a reputation within your league as being someone who's always bending someone over in a trade, and you're always the one coming out, miles ahead in every interaction you have, people are less likely to want to deal with you because they know that you always find a way to get the best out of it. Everyone in a trade wants to feel like they have won the trade. And I think that there's probably not enough understanding that there is so many trades that can be win-win. In time, with hindsight, there's always someone who won that trade, but on the surface at the time, it can definitely be win-win. Anyway, they're just some of my thoughts. There's a lot to it, and I'd like to go into more detail in another episode. But for this episode, I want to talk about the guys who are sell high and buy low guys, candidates. So for the sell high, I've got 5 names. And these are 5 names, and they're guys that are, potentially at the peak of their powers and coming off big seasons. But the reason I've got them at sell high, it varies from player to player, but ultimately these are guys who I don't think their value will ever be higher, and I don't necessarily think they're going to continue at the level their value suggests they would. The first guy is Josh Dunkley. and I spoke about him on the episode last week. I have a theory that he's going to drop a fair bit this year. Not right off, but he'll come down. So he's coming off, a whole series of years of fantastic averaging, like 108 last year, and his ADP in startup, keeper, and dynasty leagues at the moment is 25.7. So he's very highly thought of. I would be surprised if he had another big year, but I just think he's going to start to decline. And if you can trade a guy out just before they start to decline, it's a brilliant way to do it. It takes having a crystal ball, yes, but I'll give you an example. I had Tom Mitchell, the pig himself in a keeper side, and there were signs in the years leading up to his eventual decline that it was happening. It just looked like he was slowing down a fraction. The injuries were starting to pile up for him. And I had probably a couple of seasons where I had an opportunity to sell him still at a very high level, high value, and I didn't. Just nostalgia. I didn't want to get rid of him. He was my boy. And then before you know it, he's fallen off a cliff. He's the sub in games, and I think I ended up delisting or trading him for nothing. Anyway, so Dunkley, he's miles away from that, Dunkley. I just think now you could sell him and get a really, really high-end return for him, and I think it would be a smart move. The next guy after Dunkley's the first one there. The next guy this one's a little bit more of an eyebrow raiser because he's not old, and it's Matty Rao, the Brownlow man. He's only 24, coming off a fantastic season where he averaged 101, including that unbelievable second half of the year where he was just hitting tons every single week. And his ADP is 23.6 in startups, and I think that's fair, and I think that's about right. I just think with Rao, yes, he's got another nearly 10 years of a career ahead of him. I just think this average he's put out, the 101, is probably going to be the absolute best he gets to. I can't see him getting to 105, 110. And he may do, but I just think the type of player he is, the amount of talent that the Suns are going to have coming through as well, and even the potential that he'll get tagged now after his Brownlow year, I just think you could find someone who would give you a ransom for Matty Rao. He's 24. He's coming off a Brownlow career best year. And I just think this is the highest point in his career that you will get the most value. And obviously, if you're not getting a midfielder back and your midfield's weak, don't wreck your team to do it. But if you can afford to let him go, you could get some serious value back. And that's value I don't think we'll see for him at any other point in his career. The next guy is probably a bit more of an obvious one in Christian Salem. He's coming off a fantastic season where he played over 20 games, which he's only done, twice in the last 5 or 6 years of his career. And both times he did it, he did average over 90. So he's coming off a 93 average. He's 30 years old, and his ADP is 101.9, which is about right. Maybe it's a fraction early just for his age. But I think right now he's the 8th highest averaging defender from last year. And look, I've been a big fan of his, and I had him last year when he was playing like this. I just think, there's a history there of injuries. There's going to be a fair bit of change at Melbourne. Maybe not this year necessarily, but I just think if you trade him now on the back of a 93, and he's going fairly early in single season drafts, relatively early in keepers, like I said, that ADP of 101.9, I reckon you could find a buyer for him who would pay absolutely more than what he's worth. And he's a classic guy of selling high. He's 30 years old. I don't know if he'll ever have this much value. He'll never He may never have had a season like last season again, just that continuity in his body. I reckon it's a good time to get off. The next one is Isaac Heaney, who I don't know. I think I'm in the minority here. And again, I spoke about this last week. There are going to be some who play keeper fantasy using the additional dual positions in which Heaney has forward status. So I guess I'll preface this by saying I'm not talking about any leagues where he's a forward, because I would not advocate selling him with forward status. But as a mid only at 29 years of age, coming off an average of 97, I've been a little surprised at the hype around him and how sought after he is. And his ADP is 30.5, but again, that's probably skewed to the leagues who have him available in the forward lines. But I don't know, he had that big breakout in 24 when he went to the midfield. And then last year he played the same role and didn't average 100. He only got to 97. Look, I'd like to have him myself, Heaney, because I think he does eventually get that forward status back. But right now, people are just chips in on him. I reckon you could trade him at age 29, bring in someone younger and, really cash out at what is probably the high point for his career, just in terms of the hype around him in the fantasy world. And then the last guy I've got for the sell high is the veteran rookie for Geelong, Sean Manor, who had a fantastic season last year, averaging 88. And he's got a very nice ADP of 79.1. So people are going fairly early to get him in. The reason I've got him here is he's 28 years old. And that's not to say he doesn't have a few good years left, but I don't know how sustainable it's going to be for him to be averaging, in the near 90s, as well as Brian Myers averaging in the 90s. And I know they did it last year. I don't know if it's sustainable long term. And I think a guy at 28 years of age who, had a big year, but I don't know. I reckon if you sell him now, you could get a really good price for him and you probably wouldn't regret it. Don't know though. It's a bit of a hard one, that, because forwards are so valuable. It's just that age that I see and just think, you could convert that to a younger guy and get much more out of him. So there's my 5 names who I think are just about at the peak of their fantasy value that you can sell now and get top dollar for, and potentially move them on before they drop off, decline, or lose any of their currency. On the other side of the coin, the flip side of selling high is buying low. Another really important skill to have in the trading game with keeper and dynasty leagues, identifying a player who is at a low point and maybe in a side coached by someone who's just frustrated, sick of carrying this player, or has just run out of patience. Now, there is a rule, in the game about never sell a player at their lowest point, and that's true, but it doesn't mean people don't do it. And if you can come in at these 5 names I'm going to give you, if you can come at the owner of these guys in your league with an offer that's not low ball, but certainly nowhere near the actual value of the player, you could get a deal done, bring this guy in at a low point, and then reap the rewards. So who are they? 5 guys I've got. Sam Walsh is the first one. Probably a bit of a tricky one. I'd be surprised if many would be willing to let him go. He's got an ADP in startups at 33.2, so he's still pretty highly thought of. He's coming off an average of 93. He's 25. The only reason I could see someone giving up on him or selling for a relatively okay price, but not what he's worth, is just the frustration that would be owning him. And it's been many years of seeing bits and pieces of what could be potentially the best scoring player in the game, in my opinion, but only getting, a 93 average last year and missing games. Interrupted pre-seasons have been his biggest problem, and then he can never really get into the year. And then as a result, Carlton sort of push him onto a wing or put him on the outside to protect him a bit. Nah, none of that is the Walsh that I think we're going to see. Now that he's had this pre-season this year, touch wood, that has gone well, I think he's going to absolutely explode. And I think if you can grab him off a frustrated owner now, you'll never be able to get him again for the price you pay if you make the offer now, because I think he's going to finally explode, and then it won't even be a case of, you'll have to offer more. I just don't think he'll be tradable if he catches fire the way I think he can. So have a look for Sam Walsh in your league. If the coach has already got a really strong midfield or a youthful midfield, they might let him go. It's worth a try. The next guy is a really interesting one in terms of the buy low concept, because he's coming off an average of 106, and his ADP in startups is 55.4 still. But I'm talking about Rowan Marshall. When Tom De Koning joined St Kilda in the off-season, Rowan Marshall owners would have been very nervous and not too pleased about it. Then when the Geelong trade talk started, Marshall owners all of a sudden would have been thinking, oh yes, Marshall can go to Geelong, be the ruckman that they've been wanting for so long, and keep delivering me these incredible 105 plus averages for the next few years. Now, as we know, that trade didn't happen, and Marshall stayed at St Kilda with De Koning, which I think is going to have a lot of coaches considering letting him go for the right offer. And I think you could probably get him for less than what he's worth because of that reason. But why would you want him? Well, apart from the obvious, it's Rowan Marshall. And I talked about this last week. I think if you can put up with 1 year of maybe not the best out of him, I think the following is going to happen, or could happen. I reckon he gets forward status because Tom De Koning is going to be the main man. He gets his forward status, Marshall. He still averages at least 90, I think, but let's say worst case in the 80s. And then in 2027, Geelong get their man, and he gets over to Geelong as the number one ruck with forward status. All of a sudden, imagine his value then in 12 months' time if that happens. So I reckon if you can nab him now, while the current coach is a little dejected still from the Tom De Koning arrival, if you can pluck Marshall, have him for a year, and then all goes well, and he's a forward available number one ruck next year, absolutely laughing. The next guy is Tom De Koning himself, and it's kind of a similar story. I mean, he's obviously younger. He's 26. He's coming off an average of 85, and his ADP is a bit lower. No, not much lower though than Marshall. 46.2. So people are still keen on Marshall. But De Koning owners, similar thing. I mean, they would have been excited to hear he was joining St Kilda, but wondering what's happening with Marshall. They would have been just as excited as Marshall owners at the thought of Marshall leaving to Geelong. Anyway, De Koning is probably the one guy that's just not being talked about enough, in my opinion, even in classic circles for that ruck spot. I know he's sharing with Marshall this year, but I think this guy, the type of ruck he is, De Koning, with these new rule changes to the rucks, I think he could be the number one ruck in the game, and I've thought that since early last year when he blitzed the opening month for Carlton, and then things didn't go as well, and I think he probably played like someone whose mind was made up of his future for Carlton. So, yeah, that average of 85 is very conservative, I think. Anyway, point is, if you could get him and pay, not top dollar because, hey, he's sharing with Marshall and, hey, he's only coming off the 85 average, I think even if Marshall sticks around, Tom De Koning is going to be one of the best rucks to have. And, yeah, you do well to grab him now. The next guy is Jason Horne-Francis. And a bit like Sam Walsh, the ADP doesn't really tell the tale of a guy people aren't rating, because he's coming in at 34.5. And that ADP, as I said, is for new startup keeper and dynasty leagues on the Keeper Fantasy platform. So he sits at 34.5, coming off an average of 82, and he's only 22, still a baby. The reason I think he's gettable is he had forward status last year. Yes, last year. And now he's lost it. And, did he lose it the year before? Hold on. Whenever he lost it. So he's mid-only now, is the point. So he lost the forward status. He went backwards in his average last year by about 7 or 8 points, thanks to some injury interruptions that he had throughout the year. And I reckon there'd be some owners, some coaches who would think, what was it, the fourth year he went 89 average. I kind of expected more from him last year. Maybe he's just not going to be a 100 guy or even mid to high 90s. But, yeah, and if someone thinks that way, that's where you pounce. Go and get him. Go and pay a bit, but not what I think he's worth. Get him now, particularly with this nagging foot injury he's carrying into this year. He had foot surgery and then he played in the Pracky match on the weekend, but they pulled him out for precautionary reasons. Anyway, it's just a time where Horne-Francis chips are a little down, and I think you could pounce and get him. Because the thing with Horne-Francis is, he reminds me so much of Paddy Dangerfield. And players like that, if you go back over the journey and you look at guys like Dusty Martin, Bontempelli, Fife, I always call these guys Supercoach guys, that from the start of their career, they're Supercoach guns, but it isn't until seasons 6, 7, even 8, 9, where they explode in fantasy and start putting out the 100 seasons. And I think that's going to happen with Horne-Francis. It's probably a few years away still, but I think he's real unders at the minute with that 82 average. And again, this isn't reflected in the ADPs, so maybe he's not as gettable as I think, but yeah, worth a crack. Because if someone's frustrated with him, just offer your side as a new home for him. And the last one, I really like this one because this is the absolute definition of buying low. It's Kadeen Coleman. His ADP sits at 131.3, which is miles off what it would have been in recent years. He's coming off an average of 73, which is actually all right on paper, but I think it was from a handful of games, and he is 25. So there's a few reasons why his stocks are very low at the moment. The obvious, since the 2024 grand final, 23 grand final, when did Collingwood win it? 23. Since that grand final, where he was absolutely huge, he's barely played any footy because of injuries. And in his absence, his reputation just grew. The longer he was out of the game, the more we just remembered that grand final performance when he was on. Was he on like 100 at halftime or something like that? Then when he returned and then got injured again, it's like, maybe he's not going to be what we thought. And then the next part of it is, in the practice game on the weekend, he was playing forward, which had been flagged, as I talked about earlier, from the coach, Chris Fagan, saying we might put him forward to start. So I reckon there's going to be a lot of coaches who are like, oh my God, I held this guy for all these years. Now he's back and he's got to be a forward flanker. No thanks. If you can get in there and take him for, look, it won't be a bag of chips, but much less than what you ever thought you'd have to pay to get Kitty Coleman, bring him over to your side, let him sit and maybe sit on your bench if you can, and let him play as a forward for this year. Let him pick up forward status, and then after another big pre-season, watch him be released into his natural position off halfback, potentially in 2027 or even this year as the year rolls on. Dane Zorko ain't playing forever. I mean, it looks like he will, because he just sort of is, but he will stop eventually. And I think that halfback role will be Coleman's again. It's just, can you sit through this period where he's a forward? I think you can, particularly if he puts up an average of 70 as a forward. Is that the worst thing in the world? And then gets his forward status and then moves to the halfback distribution role. That would be perfection. So what do you think of my sell high guys and my buy low guys? Got 5 candidates there on each side of the coin. Tell me what you think. Hit me up on X at FineKeepAFL. Would love your thoughts on the guys I've put up. And actually, I've got to say, there's a whole bunch of people who messaged me on Finders Keepers X, and for some reason I didn't realise there were a whole bunch of messages that were like requests. I thought it should have been all open and anyone can message me. So anyway, apologies to the guys, and I've written back to you. Some who have asked me questions back in December, and I've answered now, but it's probably a little late. So apologies, I've got that worked out now. And absolutely, if you send a message to Finders Keepers, you will get a response. And if you want, it can get read out on the podcast. Speaking of which, I've got one. A couple of questions that have come through. This is from @Ethan_Prendy. And Ethan's a good follower of the podcast. He's written in a few times. I really appreciate the support, mate. So he's got a couple. The first one's a bit simple. Do you think Touk Miller or Jason Horne-Francis will pick up forward DPP come round 6? I think that Horne-Francis will. I think with his foot concern, with Will Brodie in the side, I reckon he will play a bit more forward. I mean, he was so close to keeping forward status this year anyway, so it's not going to really have to be a huge shift from what we saw last year. So I reckon he will. Touk Miller's the other one. I'm pretty optimistic he will. Whether it's in round 6 or later in the year, I'm not sure. I reckon that one might be a bit later in the year. I know he's going to be playing a bit more forward, but I think he's still going to have that midfield rotation enough, at least for the first half of the year, and we might see it later. But yeah, I think I'd be surprised, genuinely surprised, if we got to the end of the year and neither of them had forward status. So I'll go with that. And then secondly, a bit of a question about what to do with his side. So where do you think I should be moving with my team this year? I'm a contender, probably in second, third place, but around 100 points behind first. My midfield's still very young. I've got guys like Ash, Fletcher, Bergman as those young defenders. The only concern is I have no real tradable assets to upgrade on field as of right now, and still have older guys like Wilkie and Sinclair, Toby Green, Touk Miller, Petrarca. Is it worth trying to sell someone like a Sinclair, bide my time till next year, given Green's ACL injury is a killer? So I went back to him and just said, well, what's your midfield look like currently? And he said, Bailey Smith, Nick Dacos, Goulden, Rao, Horne-Francis, Touk Miller, with Connor Nash and Jagger Smith. So I don't know how deep your league is, obviously, how many teams and whatnot, but my God, man, that is a hell of a midfield. I don't think you should be entertaining anything other than going for the flag when you've got that midfield. And the fact that you've got those older guys, Sinclair, Toby Green, Took Miller, Christian Petrarca, is, they're just the older guys, the cream on the top of that midfield. And the best case about those guys is, if you go for it this year, which I just think you should, and things don't work out, later in the year, you can just start selling those guys off to the contenders. I mean, Jack Sinclair, Petrarca, oh man, you got plenty to work with there. So go for the flag for sure. But you're in a good spot. So I'd be feeling good. He also wants to know any deep league pickups that are an option after the practice matches. Well, I mean, I kind of went through the names that caught my attention in the pracky matches. And yeah, there's probably no one else at the minute, but we'll see what this weekend gives. But thanks very much, Ethan. Good questions as always from you, mate. And best of luck for a big 2026, because that midfield of yours, oh boy. And I've got a trade here from Big Red at Mortarded. He has traded Tom Green for a first round pick 2026. So that's a first round pick in this season, his upcoming draft, and a second round pick 2027. Trading out of the year to contend in years to come. Yeah, I don't know. I reckon it's a little bit quick to jump on Green. I know it's an ACL and 12 months feels like forever, but he is young and he will be back. I don't know if there's anyone in the first round of this draft that I'd necessarily have ahead of him, even with the year off. And then a second round of next year. Yeah, I don't know. I guess you just got to go for it. And I guess I'm just hoping you've got a really deep and young midfield already, and Tom Green was expendable anyway. So anyway, thanks for sending it through, Big Red. I mean, you got to make the big decisions to do well in this game, as we know. Now, the last one comes from Matt at Pies2211, and he's asked, will this trade haunt me in a few years, or are they good ins? So, I mean, strap yourselves in. This is one of the biggest trades I've ever seen. I'm going to go through it. It's a lot of names. Bear with me. Ins: Isaac Rankin, Annabelle, Zeke Hewland, Farrow, Schubert, Anderson, Madden, Onley, Barnett, and a future first. Out: Sam Darcy, Jasper Fletcher, Rory Lobb, Xavier O'Halloran, Dan McStay, Alex Dodson, and a future second. So let's break this down. Let's look at your outs. Sam Darcy, Jasper Fletcher, big outs, yeah? Like, they're big names. In fact, looking at it, I'd really just say that's what you've given up. The others, not so much. The future second with Sam Darcy, Jasper Fletcher. And then coming in, Rankin, which is, I think, awesome. And then you've got three names who are very big in this year's draft, but I don't know how big they are in terms of recent drafts. Annabelle, Hewland, and Farrow. And then those other names, Schubert, who's a forward. Anderson, who's that young Collingwood mid, he could be all right. Nick Madden, I do like him, the young ruck, and then even Barnett at West Coast, Onley in the future first. So, all right, let me try and just zip this down to Sam Darcy, Jasper Fletcher in a future second. For Rankin, three of the best kids from this draft, plus some other future guys and potential rucks, and a future first. I don't know if it's fair to say it'll haunt you in a few years. I wouldn't have traded Sam Darcy myself. Rankin's awesome though. I mean, Rankin's going to be a guy that keeps forward status. And I really like Annabelle, Hewland, and Farrow, but Darcy and Fletcher. Not sure. I'm just going to say it will haunt you. Sorry, Matt. And it'll only haunt you just watching Sam Darcy dominate every week. That's all. But you certainly got some brilliant kids and the best ones you could get in this draft. So that's something And that's obviously why he did it. Yeah, not my cup of tea, that trade, but I love that people are willing to just throw all these names in and out and really shift their list. And thanks for sending it in. That's an awesome trade to review. And with that, I will wrap up this week's episode of Finders Keepers. Ended up being a longer episode than I had envisaged, but I guess that's a good thing. I hope it's a good thing. You'll be the judge of that. And if you are enjoying the pod and the podcast in general, please make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening. Give us a 5-star review as well if you're really enjoying it. And I guess just thank you for listening. It's been a really big pre-season for Finders Keepers. Lots of new listeners and, great engagement on X as always. Just really drives me to keep going and make it even better this year, and that's the plan. Plenty more to look forward to this pre-season. Only a couple of weeks left and then the season is upon us. Who can believe that? We are nearly at the end of Feb. Crazy. So make sure you're tuning in every week to Finders Keepers for more Keeper League goodness. And tell your friends. If you've got mates in your Keeper League who haven't heard of Finders Keepers and you reckon they'd like it, tell them. Let's just get everyone listening. That is the plan. All right, I'm all done. I'll talk to you next week. In the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.